We gather into this circle of care to dream, to envision, to embody and achieve the compassion that we dream, the justice we envision, the dignity of each in an ever-growing circle of love and of justice. Come, let us worship together.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Berkeley. I'm Don Close, and I'm your worship associate today. This is a welcoming congregation, and we are always working hard on how to better welcome and care for one another. If this is your first time here, we're so glad you've come. whoever you are, we welcome you in the fullness of who you are. As we begin, we want to acknowledge that this church occupies land in Huichin, the unceded territory of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. We understand that we continue to benefit from the seizure and occupation of this land. We acknowledge and embrace our responsibility to take restorative action. We affirm that this is deeply felt and commit our congregation to act in right relationship with Indigenous communities, aligning in solidarity, supporting Indigenous projects, and taking care of the land. So please take a moment to prepare yourself and your space for our time together. You might get a candle and a way to light it so you can join in the chalice lighting at home. Now, as Reverend Michelle lights the chalice flame, let's kindle our own flames along with her to these words by Julianne Lepp. We seek our place in the world and answers to our heart's deep questions. As we seek, may our hearts be open to unexpected answers. May the light of our chalice remind us that this community is a community of warmth, of wisdom, and welcoming of multiple truths. We also pause to remind ourselves of some of the foundations of resilience. With Reverend Michelle, we light a candle of courage, a candle of acts of service, a candle of fellowship, and a candle of hope. May we find and cultivate these in ourselves and one another. Now please join us in singing our opening song, Blue Boat Home. The words will be on the screen.
Standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean, still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the light of the heavens in our beautiful blue boat home. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on, greet the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and
Please join me in saying our covenant. Love guides this church. The quest for truth and justice is its common purpose. To give thanks, listen deeply, speak with care, honor our differences, and seek and grant forgiveness. These things we covenant with one another.
On the day I was born, said my father, said he, I've an elegant legacy waiting for ye. 'Tis a rhyme for your lips and a song for your heart, to sing it whenever the world falls apart. Look, look, look to the rainbow, follow it over the hill and stream. Look, look, look to the rainbow, follow the fellow who follows a dream. 'Twas a sumptuous gift to bequeath to a child, oh, the lure of that song kept her feet running wild. For you never grow old, and you never stand still, with whippoorwill singing beyond the next hill. Look, look, look to the rainbow, follow it over the hill and stream. Look, look, look to the rainbow, follow the fellow who follows a dream. Follow the fellow, follow the fellow, follow the fellow who follows a dream.
So Happy New Year, everyone. Now wait, you say, didn't we talk about that a month ago at the New Year? Well, there are different New Years throughout the year depending on what culture you may be part of. And this past Tuesday saw the Chinese New Year. And other cultures, Asian cultures, who also celebrate the Lunar New Year right at this time of the year. And now, yes, it was rung in on Tuesday, but it's not just a New Year's Day. In many places, the festivities will go on for more than 2 weeks, with feasts, family reunions, street parades, and visits to shrines. All right, so what is this Lunar New Year thing? And why are we saying lunar? Well, in the United States, many of our holidays follow the solar calendar, so the sun year. But the lunar calendar, so a calendar based on moon cycles, is what many other cultures follow. And that means the Lunar New Year falls on a slightly different day every year. Last year it was on January 31st, and this year it was this past Tuesday on February the 1st. And now it's often seen as a time of reunion and rebirth, marking the end of winter and the start of spring. And according to one legend, a monster, this is a cool legend, right? A monster would emerge from under the earth at the start of every year and eat villagers. Since the monster, which is called Neon, Chinese for year, was afraid of bright lights and loud noises and the color red, you can see where their traditions associated with this holiday came from. These things, bright lights, loud noises, and the color red, were used to exile the beast and now have all been associated with the holiday. Pretty cool, right? And now there's all sorts of things that happen in celebrations, and you're going to be seeing some pictures on screen of some of these. Most familiar are in the Chinese celebrations with the arrival of the New Year are large public celebrations, dragon parades, boat races, fireworks, and firecrackers to ward off bad luck and keep that monster away so we don't all get eaten. Red and gold symbolize good fortune on the Lunar New Year as well. And many people wear red, and children often get red envelopes with money in them. And the Lantern Festival, which is, I believe, at the end of the next lunar cycle, symbolizes the end of the New Year season. And it's marked by the flying of paper lanterns and the eating of turnip cakes and a Chinese dessert of sweet rice ball dumplings. I've never had a turnip cake. Maybe I should sometime, but I'm not quite sure. But that's just me. I might need to widen my perspective and try it sometime. So, there are different animals for each year. It's on a 12-year cycle. And let's see, I'm going to read them all off. I want you to think and see if you can remember what this last year's was, and then maybe if you know what this year's is. The 12, and I'm going to mix them up so you can't even figure them out with the order. The rooster, the rat, the rabbit, the snake, the tiger, the pig, the dog, the ox, the dragon, the horse, the goat, and the monkey. So anyone, do you know what last year's was? It was an ox. Good, hard-working, stable ox. And this year's is a tiger. Pretty awesome, right? So the tigers, it is the tiger, not the lion, that's the king of the jungle in Asian cultures. People born during a tiger year are thought to be natural leaders, brave, thrill-seeking, often craving attention, courageous and energetic, loving a challenge, and prepared to take risks. They can also be rebellious, maybe short-tempered, outspoken, preferring to give orders rather than take them. But you know, sometimes that is a good feature to have in a leader. So fabulous people are born under each animal, and it'll be exciting to see who gets born under this, the year of the tiger. So, Happy New Year, everyone, and let's have a fabulous year and make lots of noise to scare away that scary monster. Katya, thank you for that fabulous Lunar New Year music. We've now come to the time in our service we make for our hearts and our spirits, for holding ourselves and each other tenderly. We lift up and hold the joys, the sorrows, the concerns, and the challenges we may each be facing. During our service this morning, I invite you to share in the comments section any joys or sorrows or significant milestones of your own in the comments section. I invite us all to hold these cares and these sharings in the embrace of this, our loving community. Let's join now in a time of silence. Please join now in the spirit of prayer. Spirit of light and love, spirit of resistance, spirit of generosity, that which serves as our conscience in this, our work that we do to dismantle white supremacy, to empower the marginalized, to insist that Black lives matter, that we have been angered, we have been saddened, we have been pushed to the brink once more, ever again. We are also inspired and seem resolved to do better, to not simply get to the other side of this moment, but to get there morally healthier, to get to a safer space for Black bodies and bodies of color. Great Spirit, help us to understand that we each have a role, for our liberations are tied to one another's. Give us clarity of mind to know what our individual part is in the struggle, that there are many ways to protest injustice, many ways to seek the justice that we hope for. Help us to find our way and commit to it. Great Spirits, we ask for guidance. Send us strength and endurance. Help us to give our all to this and hold nothing back, for many precious lives depend on it. We will be imperfect. Rest assured that we will mess up over and over. But we must do it anyway. May we summon the courage to tear down every system of injustice and get busy working to create world community with true justice for all. Amen.
Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, and all of us imprisoned, circle for release, circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned, circle for release, circle for the planet, circle for each soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole.
When I reflect on the question, what are the sources of my faith? One answer pops right out. It is us, our church, our community, who we are and what we do. Take, for example, our theme for today, Widening the Circle of Concern. A group of 11 fellow church members comprised our Widening the Circle of Concern task force. They devoted a year of searching, reflection, and dialogue on the Widening the Circle study published by the UUCB Commission on Institutional Change. Our task force then produced a 100-plus page report for us, a comprehensive discussion and series of recommendations customed for UUCB. This report provides a roadmap for the many ways we can walk our talk when it comes to our social justice values, an action guide reaching into virtually every activity of our church life. During the past week, I have delved into the task force's report. If you haven't already, I urge you to read it. Overall, it addresses the question, how will we vigorously engage in the fight against white supremacy, racism, and other forms of oppression that terrorize and kill marginalized people and communities, and diminish the richness of life for all communities? Throughout, the task force guides us to operationalize, to put into doable, concrete steps how we can actualize our commitments to anti-racism, anti-oppression, equity, and inclusivity. I describe the report as comprehensive because of its great depth, breadth, and detail. I counted 68 recommendations across 7 domains. These actions reach into multiple directions throughout our church life, into outside communities, organizations, and neighborhoods, locally and globally, and also, crucially, into ourselves, into our souls. They call on us to enlarge our understandings of the world we live in, but also to uncover and confront our own unconscious biases or attitudes that may impede us in living our values fully. So they acknowledge that the work may include discomfort and resistance, and counsel caring for each other and ourselves, and patience. And since the report reaches into every dimension of our church life, each of us can find a way to enter into the work of widening the circle of concern. I cannot begin to summarize the report. Let me mention just a couple sections that stand out for me. There's a strong emphasis on engaging our youth more meaningfully and directly in our church life, kids of all ages up through high school. For example, in social justice council projects and in participating in our worship services on a regular basis. Having assisted in teaching the middle school group for a couple of years, I know firsthand the challenge of sparking interest and fostering connection of our youth in our adult-oriented environment. I was especially taken by the inclusion of reparations as an action project. This is a concern of mine since reading Ta-Nehisi Coates' landmark Atlantic article back in 2014. The report articulates the key principle: no reconciliation without reparations, and suggests opportunities to reach out to movements on the state and national levels, but also locally, such as joining with our neighbor, Arlington Community Church's project, the Black Wealth Builders Fund. 2 concluding points. Widening the circle of concern is an ongoing, open-ended journey. Some action projects may come to an early fruition, some may require perpetual work. And then implicit throughout and explicit at the end, there is an insistence on accountability. The demand for accountability is built into each endeavor. It keeps us on track. It makes us be real. It asks us to be honest with ourselves and each other. In the words of the report, acts of accountability are love notes to our future selves and to our future congregation. We care so much about the work continuing long after we are gone that we are taking time now to build strong foundations of support, to guide us and hold us along the way. May it be so.
Widening the circle of concern. For folks who've been around UUCB or UU for a bit, you've probably heard this phrase at least a couple of times. For folks who haven't, now you have. You get to hear it, about where it came from, and what it means. Widening the Circle of Concern is the published report from the Unitarian Universalist Association's Commission on Institutional Change, which was established after the events of 2017. Now, these events, which we'll get to in just a sec, did directly precipitate the formation of the commission and ended up dominoing a lot of other things too, but there's a lot of history behind it. It's in the overall area of racial justice and racial oppression, but has widened to include other oppressions and marginalizations too. And by the way, it's clear that some of these things are just not the norm for open discussion in our society. Just so far, in what I've said just now, 3 words were unrecognized by my document editor's dictionary. I got those little red squiggles under them saying they weren't words. Talking about them apparently is not the norm, but it should be. Now, as we've talked about before, Unitarians and Universalists have a lot of history with regards to racial oppression, and it runs the gambit from vocal abolitionist leaders to supporters of eugenics and supporters of the institution of slavery. The lack of institutional cohesion became abundantly apparent shortly after the Unitarians and Universalists came together in 1961 with the so-called Black empowerment controversy, which some have rightly named the white power controversy. This is when the Association and the General Assembly was deeply divided on whether to support all Black leadership of funds promised for projects or to insist on white input and leadership in those decisions. Okay, there is more, but that is at least one major crux of the issue. Monies were promised, and then the commitment was rescinded. Lawsuits came, and the fledgling denomination was nearly bankrupted as a result. The tension was never really resolved and continued to brew, continued to fester until the present. Now, we can point at the incident in the spring of 2017 as a starting incident, but the racism present in and embedded in our association have been there for ages. One colleague told me they had warned then association president Peter Morales that if he didn't address the dragon of racism that was sleeping in the basement of association headquarters, that it was going to blow up in his face. And it did. The seemingly innocuous triggering incident was a hiring decision. The hiring of the lead role for the UU Southern region in the spring of 2017. A white man was chosen for the role, and one of the other contenders, a woman of color, spoke out about the decision. Then things started to explode. The UUA president said some dumb things that he shouldn't have. The UU Ministers Association executive director also said some dumb things he shouldn't have. Some other folks did too. Lots of reactiveness happened, and lots of really solid analysis happened too, that pointed to racially driven decisions and practices that have been going on for years. Hence the creation of the Commission on Institutional Change that took a good, hard look at a lot of it. Their final report called on both congregations and the association to make a lot of changes and shifts to address the embedded racism in the system and in UU culture. I love the phrase, widening the circle of concern, which they titled the report, and which also gives us a touchstone to hold on to as we're exploring how to go about doing this in our congregations and also in each of our lives and our own personal contexts. This has also arisen concurrently with the work in the wider society in the United States to openly, or at least more openly, address racism and white supremacy culture. So what I'd like to invite us to think about today is, what does it mean to widen our circle of concern? What does that mean for us in a personal sense? So in our lives and within our own spheres of influence. What does it mean in our communities, our church, and other institutions we may each be part of? And what does that mean in a larger sense too? What does it mean to widen our circle of concern? To start out with, let's consider the smallest of those contexts, that of ourselves and our personal lives. Now, it's small in one sense, but really this is often where change needs to happen for it to be able to extend out to a larger sense. Although, just to contradict what I just said, we also can't get fooled into thinking that large-scale change always starts on a personal level or always depends on personal level change. That's a fallacy that hampers change and shifts the responsibility away from institutions onto individuals, letting the institutions get off nearly scot-free. Whether we're talking radical change, racial change efforts, or environmental impacts, this is something that has been all too evident in our society. It's the individual's fault, not the institutions, because that's not true at all. Regardless, it is still quite important to consider things on a single human scale, as long as we're considering a wider variety of perspectives and scales also and addressing all of them simultaneously. So first, the personal sense, widening our circles of concern. It touches on a few different things. First, what do we listen to? Who do we listen to? According to the Widening the Circle report, quote, "The patterns and habits of white supremacy culture are often unacknowledged, unrecognized, or openly denied. When we understand how these patterns and habits affect those who hold power, and especially those who are harmed by them, then we also come to understand that we can't dismantle systems of oppressive behavior without leaning into the knowledge and perspectives of those most affected. So we need to widen who and what we're listening to. We need to get those perspectives. It is more true now than perhaps in any other time in the era of modern communication that what most folks listen to is a limited and often self-selected set of voices and perspectives. There's not even the evening news or the main city newspaper that most everyone in a given area reads or listens to. It's not only in social media channels, but also in wherever folks choose to listen to their news. Their news, not the news anymore. Each of us has our own news. How many of us have favorite news sources that cover the types of things we want to hear about, that bring up the things we want to know about? What we listen to is now self-selected and by definition, limited. Now, I'd add to this, it's important to not only widen who we're listening to, but who and what we pay attention to. Not just the deluge of information and news, but paying attention. This is where some of the individual shifts have the potential to happen. Thinking back to early in the pandemic, when a great deal of focus, by the way, across news bubbles, was on essential workers. I don't know if that was ever a commonplace term before, essential workers. Then they started being seen by the wider populations in ways many of them hadn't before. I remember how pleased I was that many of them, and that truck drivers were now included in that attention, who we pay attention to. My own widening of my attention to include truck drivers happened not too many years ago. Before then, I will admit, they were pretty invisible except for the ginormous semi-trucks on the highway that are unpleasant for cars to drive around. Then I started driving for my job. Not a big truck, but a decent-sized minivan with all of the equipment for a traveling photography studio. It was heavy, and hills started affecting what the van could do. If things were piled up a certain way, my blind spots were different. And when I got to my destinations, oftentimes I had to struggle to find the right place to park and load and unload, and frankly found myself rather invisible to many of the folks in the churches where I was working. I was a church directory photographer, by the way. Going through this, I gained a whole new awareness and respect for folks who drove and who drive stuff around for a living. And also remembered a couple of my uncles drive trucks too, in between their union electrical jobs. So I was pleased when truck drivers started to be seen by folks in the wider population in a way they hadn't been before. Attention was being paid. I'm afraid I can guess how much actually changed with that awareness. Not much at all. But I'm happy for the step, however small it may be. Going further, then, from just listening and going further from paying attention is to developing empathy and bearing witness to what we see. Bearing witness to stories and experiences, bearing witness to events that are going on. Without the first things, listening and paying attention, we'll never get to bearing witness or any motivation for solidarity and being part of any change going on. So that's the personal level, at least a little bit on it. Then there are our communities, our churches, and our institutions, at least the smaller level institutions we're part of. The society-sized ones are a different scale monster entirely. We'll talk about those briefly in just a sec. Okay, so our communities and our churches. There are three main parts of widening the circle that I want to lift up today for you to be aware of and be thinking on. First is the matter of who we welcome and how we include folks. I could go on for a while on this for us as UUs, and just last week talked about our theological and spiritual journey welcoming. But even in that sense, we still have far to go. There was a time that I experienced in another UU congregation, although it could just as easily happen here, so y'all don't get off the hook on this one. Pretend it did as you're listening. It was a time when a young African-American couple walked into church one Sunday morning. They were dressed well. He was wearing a suit and a tie. She had on a dress and her Sunday hat, and they both had good-sized Bibles tucked under their arms. They were looking for the right theological home and hoped to find it there. See, they were both Universalists in a traditional sense. He had studied under the Reverend Carlton Pearson, an African-American evangelical Universalist who says a lot of really awesome things, at least in my opinion. Universalists theologically. Now, you'd think, or at least you'd hope, that they would have been welcomed with open arms, both for good reasons and, okay, for some not so good reasons. Folks of color who walk through our doors do tend to get jumped all over with welcome in UU congregations. But would it surprise you that the opposite is what happened? They looked too Christian. They looked too conservative, and folks just didn't know what to make of them. I had really hoped that they would help to widen the circle of that congregation in a few different ways, but it wasn't to be. They came for a couple of months and then stopped and went elsewhere. If we can't even widen our theological circle a little, what hope do we have of widening it in other ways? Welcome and inclusion are things we may think we do well, but I would challenge us to pick up our game in a lot of ways. Another facet of our widening the circle here in our communities is the voices and stories, the perspectives that we lift up. This is one of the most common takeaways from the Widening the Circle report, and one that is a really good one to be taking place. Many folks and many identities and perspectives have been marginalized and sidelined for way too long. And we are only going to start hearing and really hearing once we keep bringing their voices to the center over and over again. And that means no matter if we like what they're saying, no matter if we agree with what they're saying, no matter if we're okay with how they're saying it, still bringing them to the center. And not just once or twice as a token effort, but consistently and over time continuing to lift up and center traditionally marginalized voices. And remember from the quote earlier, we can't dismantle systems of oppressive behavior without leaning into the knowledge and perspective of those most affected. So just to briefly mention one other aspect of widening the circle of concern at the level of our communities, how we make decisions, how power is assigned and distributed, and how the structure looks and works. While this sounds like boring stuff, unless you're an institutional geek like I am, it is perhaps one of the more powerful ways that white supremacy culture enforces and replicates itself. And not only is it more difficult to see and analyze, but the inertia of institutions and their resistance to change of just about any sort makes these all the more difficult to address. And last, widening the circle happens at a much larger level too. It happens when we take a more inclusive look at history. Like in the book, An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, which many of us read last year with the literature, film, and drama and multimedia contingent here. Or even the popular People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. Or any time we go back and question or re-look at some piece of history that we were taught or heard. Every single scrap of it is told from a particular perspective, and by definition, that perspective leaves out others. There are policy-level changes that seek to widen perspectives and widen and change impacts. Although one does need to be careful. Those well-meaning company inclusion and anti-racism workshops, plenty of research has shown that they change behaviors, if that, for a pitifully short amount of time, and that no real change actually happens because of them. So we have to be careful in not getting fooled. And then at the larger level, but really culminations of things happening at smaller levels, is the overall work in reparations. There's a good bit of that around, and some things that UUCB is involved in too. That's widening work. So what can we do to widen the circle, and what can we do to draw the circle wider still? There are lots of possible answers to this question, but I'm not going to provide you with any of them because I want you to ask yourself instead. It's because we each have different places we're at right now. We each have different spheres of influence, the folks and communities that we can make an impact in. What are some changes that you can make for yourself? What about for a community that you are part of? Are there any ways that you're too comfortable right now? Maybe need to make yourself uncomfortable instead? Because those are important things to listen to. How can you get more uncomfortable? Get proximate, get aware, and get moving. This is important work, critical work for these times now and into the future. Let us each find our part in it and keep moving forward. May it be so.
What will we draw upon to widen our circle at UUCB? It takes vision, courage, commitment, and action, yes. It takes making our sustenance and sanctuary, this year's stewardship team's theme, to be strong not only for us here today, but also for those who have not yet found us. And for those we welcome back when the pandemic air clears, which means digging deep into our hearts and pockets to generously support what we need to widen and sustain who we are and fully live our mission. For those who are sustaining pledges to public radio fundraising, you may be looking for the alternate UUCB live stream around now to be able to skip this part of the broadcast. I'm sorry to break the news that no such button exists. No matter what we've given in the past, now is the moment when we all are asked to pledge more, to give more. For those among us who have not yet found us is a minister to follow our talented Reverend Michelle, our interim minister, continuing guidance into an ever-widening circle, strengthening our resilience, and supporting us in caring for and connecting with one another. Let's give the team who will search for this next minister a strong financial foundation to attract the very best. I am increasing my pledge by 10% to support and expand our circle and resiliency. I ask you to consider the same or more. Thank you.
As we commit together to making this a loving community, we take time to remember that UUCB needs our gifts and support. We invite you now to make an offering. Each week, half our offerings are shared with a good neighbor organization that needs our financial support. And we hope that you will continue to practice generosity with them during these difficult times. This month, our good neighbor is Collaborizing, a nonprofit organization in Richmond that engages in many social service projects, uplifting the humanity of marginalized groups, notably in the homeless communities in Richmond, as indicated in the following video. Offerings of any value are received with gratitude. Details on how to give electronically will be shown on your screen following the video and as the offertory begins. Thank you.
I'm Eduardo Martinez, Richmond City Council member, and Widen Road is part of Richmond, and they are part of our community. I want to give thumbs up to collaborating because as a city council member, I don't want to tell the residents what they need. I don't want to tell the residents how they should lead their lives, but groups like collaborating actually get out, have conversations, and they teach the homeless, houseless community how to advocate for themselves, how to approach me to let me know what I need to do in order to make life better in Richmond.
Good afternoon. I'm Leah Murray. This is my husband,
Ramon.
and we are with Collaborizing, and we are so grateful just to be here today. We just want to let you know what's going on here at Widen Road. So Widen Road, in case you don't know, is a community of unhoused residents of Richmond who are truly your neighbors. And right now we are trying to help the residents here advocate for themselves. They're learning now to speak at City Council on issues that are super important to them. So we're doing community organizing, we're giving gift cards to those who need some aid, and we're just trying to truly love our neighbors. So we hope that you join us, and we're grateful that Collaborizing is a good neighbor. We hope that you'd be a good neighbor and see these folks down here as your neighbors as well. So we are in need of gift cards in small denominations of $20 or more. We do special projects for folks. We've helped folks get cars donated on their behalf. And right now there's a big need to get some of these RVs repaired, or even just help people with new RVs until Widen Road, this unhoused neighborhood, can be sunsetted and folks can find permanent housing. Thank you so much. It's always a privilege. Thank you, UUCB.
We dedicate our offering and ourselves to the mission of this congregation, to create a loving community, inspire spiritual growth, and encourage lives of integrity, joy, and service.
It has been so good getting to be together today for our time of worship. Before we shift to our coffee hour and to the LFDMC meeting, Literature, Film, Drama, and Music or Multimedia Contingent, I want to remind you to check out all of the things going on at UUCB. Check them out on our website and the weekly email the week ahead. But I do have one thing I want to make sure and remind you of. Next Sunday, after the worship service on Zoom, is our February congregational meeting, where we'll be hearing awards that are being given to folks. We'll have a question and answer with our UUA rep about the upcoming settled minister search, and hear some other updates about things going on in the congregation. And be sure to vote, if you haven't yet, for our new board members before the meeting. The voting will be cut off before that meeting starts. Should have gotten a link in your email. If you haven't, call the church office. The link was emailed out about a week ago. Make sure you vote for our folks. Now, let us join in singing our closing song, a really fabulous song. It's a Methodist song, but it is so fabulous, I said we've got to sing it here also because it is nearly a UU song as well. Draw the circle wide. The words will be on screen. We strive together. We fight together. We seek to make the world a better place and a more just place together. May we seek to ever widen our circles and our horizons, opening our hearts, our minds, and our journeys. And now, from this time of worship, may you go with hope, with connection, with peace, and with courage. And remember, you're never all alone. Blessed be.